something, we can get on to the summations, and the first summary speaker is Jamie Susskind. Jamie.
Lord Speaker, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, this debate boils down to three issues. Would an unelected House of Lords, like the one we have just now, except fully appointed, would that be illegitimate to govern our country? The answer, of course, is no. Would an appointed chamber do a better job than an elected chamber? The answer to that is yes. And thirdly, would an appointed chamber increase trust in our government? And the answer to that is also yes. I'm going to go through each of those now, looking at this debate and the questions that have arisen from the floor and explaining why I believe the Habs have come out on top. And the question of legitimacy. What we heard from the proposition was that democracy is good and that democracy is always good. That was essentially the first half of the first speech. And what we came back to that with was, actually democracy is good when it's serving a purpose. And the purpose of the democracy is to serve in this Parliament is to take the voice of the people and make it into law. And that's what happens in the House of Commons. But the job of the House of Lords is not to do that, ladies and gentlemen, and it's therefore not the job of politicians. This is a House which scrutinises which fine-combs the details, which scrutinises the nitty-gritty aspects of legislation. And we say the people to do that are the people who know more about it than anyone else in the world, or at least anyone else in the country. And this leads on, ladies, and I gave you the example of the Monetary Policy Committee, which the proposition never came back to, so we suspect that they agree with us on that one. Secondly, who would do a better job of the actual role of the House of Lords? Elected politicians or appointed experts? Well, we say the technical knowledge required when, say, looking at something like immunology or a complex European directive in the case of law is something that a politician just won't have, because their career is as a politician and not as an immunologist or as a lawyer. And moreover, we heard this question from the floor that some experts will be voting on aspects of policy which they weren't actually experts in, and we concede that. We say that's right. But actually, if you look at the way the House of Lords works, 40% of what it does is written and oral questions, which just requires one person to do it, i.e. the expert in charge. Second of all, what the other work of the House of Lords usually takes place in committees, of very small committees of people who are relevant for the topic. So again, we'd have the very small group of experts who have the knowledge of the necessary subject. And third of all, their House has no experts at all, and at least ours has some, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what we see as the important thing about our system. I talked about why expert knowledge was important, and James talked about why impartiality was important. Why this is not a house for issues to be polarised and made black and white. And Mrs. McGrath asked the question, well, how will you prevent people with political beliefs getting into this house? We can't. But what we can say is that it won't be a house dominated by whips, with government and opposition benches, ladies and gentlemen. If people happen to have political beliefs, then so be it. But we don't believe that there are more experts in one party than in another, for example, and we therefore say that it would balance itself out. If it's politicisation you're worried about, Mrs. McGrath, then you certainly wouldn't want a fully elected chamber, like they're suggesting. And finally, trust. I suspect it's the first and last time in my life that I will hear someone say, we have an institution that no one trusts, so let's fill it to the brim with politicians. The first time I ever met a politician, I was quite young, I said, hello, I've heard lots about you. He replied, you can't prove any of it. Frankly, the people we trust in society are not necessarily the elected ones. They're the ones who do a good job. Surgeons, pilots, Bank of England Monetary Policy Committee economists, for example. Elections do not equal trust. In fact, I think quite the opposite seems the case a lot of the time. Ours is a system that gains legitimacy from the fact that it does a good job. And that's what we say the British public want, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we think they're reasonable to ask of these great houses of Parliament. And because it does a good job, it's an institution which would be trusted and loved by the British people. And we think this is a house that's deserving of that trust and deserving of that love. And so we beg you to stand with England, stand with the opposition. Thank you.
And our final